Thank you for coming. So my name is Matt Dinniman, and I am here with my good friend Charles.
Hey everybody, thanks for coming out to support the launch of this incredible book and the whole incredible series that Matt has made. We're going to talk about it for a little while. We'll take questions. I'm seeing some real shirts and cosplay and amazing things. You guys are real big fans, huh? I guess you wouldn't be here if you weren't, right?
So just real fast, every time I do one of these, I ask a couple questions. Raise your hand if you've already read Dungeon Crawler Carl. All right, let's do this opposite. Raise your hand if you have not read Dungeon Crawler Carl. So there's like 3 people here. Okay, so security. We'll have these people leave. No, we're still going to try to keep, when we do questions, we're going to try to keep the spoilers to a minimum, especially past Book 5, because that's kind of what we're here to talk about, Book 5. Who here, when they first consumed Dungeon Crawler Carl, their primary way they consume it is via audiobook?
I thought it'd be more than that.
Yeah, it's interesting. That number is actually getting lower, which is fantastic. Who here first consumed it via the Ace Edition hardcovers? Yeah, that's a decent number as well. Very cool. Well, thank you all for coming tonight.
All right. So I should say I have read or listened to all of them. And one of the reasons is that we share a literary agent, the incredible Seth Fishman. And I met Matt at DragonCon last August in Atlanta. And Seth was telling me about this series. And I was like, okay, I was like, what is LitRPG? I didn't even really know what the form was at that time. And he's like, well, like people have stats, like it's like Dungeons and Dragons kind of, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, all right. And this is your agent, mind you. And so I'm like, but it sounds cool, and Matt was very cool. Like we hung out a tiny bit at DragonCon and he seemed like a good dude. And so I picked up Dungeon Crawler Call, or I bought it on audio. Sound Booth Theater, narrated by Jeff Hayes, which is a name that I think many of you guys know. Yeah, incredible, right? And so that was in August, and I have now listened to all 7 of these books. And as you can see, these things are like 40,000 pages long, which I think is a testament to what you've done here. Like these things are like crack, man. They're just... The series is incredibly powerful in its propulsiveness and its grabbiness and its fun and its pathos and all of the things that great stories are. And so the first question I have, can I ask you some questions now?
Please do.
Okay, is where did this come from? I mean, I have some thoughts, but I'm curious, like where did it come from? Why did you do this?
Crack.
You needed to dig yourself out somehow, huh?
No, I've been writing a long time. I've been writing stories ever since I was a little kid. I used to write, this is true, I used to write G.I. Joe versus Transformers fan fiction when I was a little kid. And
sexy.
Yeah. And I would show that to my friends, and they're like, you're batshit crazy. We don't want to be friends with you anymore. And my first story was published in a national magazine in 1999. Gay Men's Magazine, and I had to pretend like I was a gay man to... And I've been...
That's moving on.
Anyway, my first book came out in 2003, so a lot of people say, wow, this kind of blew up overnight. The story may have appeared overnight, but I've been working as a writer all of my life, all of my adult life, and even before that. And I'm a big fan of the LitRPG style books. And when I started writing Carl, my intention wasn't to publish it. It was to put it on Royal Road, to publish it for free, basically, and just kind of put everything I've ever always wanted to write into a story and make it as crazy as possible, and then maybe somebody would read it. And a couple of people have read it, Between these books, the print editions, the e-books, and the audiobooks, for the whole series, we are well over 2 million copies sold now. But to get to your actual question, kind of like what inspired this specifically, I always wanted to write a book about a talking cat and a talking sex doll head and a talking slug, and
One of the things that I like about the book is kind of the talking sex doll head, and all of the other things that you have managed to cram into this world that seem to organically work within it. Like you look at book 6, which we're not supposed to talk about.
Just go with it.
But
we have a copy of book 6 here too.
Like in book 6, you are able to bring real world locations back, like locations on the surface of the planet, start appearing back in the book through a mechanism that you made up, and so you can start writing about locations in Cuba that I'm guessing you kind of like or are interested in, or whatever the reason you chose Cuba was.
Okay. Well,
okay, go ahead.
Let's go real fast. Who here's on my Patreon? Yeah, all you guys can go fuck yourselves. So, Patreon voted on
Was that how it
voted
went?
on the location where book 6 was located. Before this book, I knew nothing about Cuba. Cuba wasn't even on my radar. We had like a an NCAA tournament style voting system that ended up, for whatever reason, being Cuba.
I think that's a problem you made for yourself, buddy. Like, you didn't have to go that way. You're the author. You could have chosen whatever place you wanted.
If you look at it that way. But so I ended up, getting a bunch of books from the library, purchasing a bunch of books, learning about the rich cultural heritage of Cuba. And it was very cool. It was amazing, but it wasn't on my list. I was sure they were going to pick like Japan or something, but
Well, that is a kind of interesting segue to the way that the fandom of this book, like you guys, but billions of people all around the world apparently, and the way that you interact with them, and the way that these books are made almost in conjunction with them on some levels. Like, you're the boss, but you've got all these little tiny bosses who also tell you things. How did that develop, and how do you feel about it? Other than it's awesome.
no, I really appreciate my Patreon, but like I said before, it started off on Royal Road, and if you're not familiar with Royal Road, it's a web serial site where you post the stories and you post them for free, and you serialize it. You posted a couple chapters at a time, and that's what I was doing. I had about 30,000 words written by the time I started posting it around the middle of January of 2020, right when nothing big happened, but but I started posting it, and I realized people were starting to read it, and they're starting to make comments on it as I wrote it. And some of those comments were interesting to me. They're speculating on things that were going to happen, commenting on like things I've already written, catching all the typos and stuff like that. And I had never done that sort of thing before, the web serial where I have basically a group of editors reading over my shoulder, telling me what they think of it as I go. And as that kind of progressed, I made a Patreon where the people got access to it early. And now that's pretty much the only way you can get to it early. I'm getting a spam call. Should I answer it? And that way of writing, I don't want to say it's a crutch, because it actually really helps me out to gauge how people are seeing certain things. But it also allows me to do stuff like the polls. We have the Patreon fans get to vote on lots of things that happen. They voted for the Dungeon Anarchist cookbook to exist. They voted for certain meatball's name for book 7. There's in book 4, there's a two-headed puppy named Orthrus. They voted for that dog to exist in the book. There's dozens of these votes, and that's my favorite part of the Patreon are the votes. And what happens is they basically force me into a corner when I write, and that's what I like, because I'm a pantser and I make it all up as I go along, and I like to come up with creative ways to get out of situations.
I mean, I think that's very interesting because it's very different from the way I do it. I keep my stories very close to me until the day that they're released, and very, very few people read them. I have like a few trusted readers that read them, but like I would find that challenging, I think. But I do connect with the idea of like putting yourself in corners, because that, I think, is whenever I find myself writing a story and like I already know what's going to happen next, then I often say, okay, that means that everybody else is going to know what happens next too.
Exactly.
And it's time to change it and do the weirdest thing I can think of, or the most horrible thing, or the best thing, or like the thing that no one will expect to happen because there's no way for the story to continue after that. It's impossible. And then you do, and then people are like, oh shit, that guy's good.
I mean, yeah, that's pretty much what I do. I like the idea of people being surprised at what happens, but afterwards them thinking, I can't imagine any other way it could have possibly gone. And it's an almost impossible task to get that done, but that's what I'm always striving for.
Yep.
And being forced into a corner and me not being able to think of a solution like that is the best way to make that work, because it forces me to sit down and think about it over and over and over. And I do that. I write scenes over and over and over again. If you're a writer, don't do that. But I will write a scene 5 times, 10 times. There's the current Patreon chapter I've written, oh my God, so many times just because of one little thing in it. And it's just the way my brain works. And then I always go, what's the craziest thing? No, this is too stupid. And then take one step back. Mm-hmm. Sometimes. Sometimes I just go with it.
I think we have slightly different brains.
From book 7 was that. Me just.
Yeah. That was quite a part, that part. Yep. Anyway. Well, I think that's all. It's always fascinating to talk with other writers about the way they do it, about the way the stories happen, where they come from, how they develop, particularly with longer form series. Mm-hmm. I've had a chance to work on lots of long form things. It's been great. Things that take, you write over a period of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years. And that's what you're doing here with this series. And we were speaking in the green room earlier, and I wanted to ask you about the way that you handle long form planning. Mm-hmm. And you immediately smiled and were like, I'm a pantser. You're like, no hesitation. And for those who don't know, do you guys know this term, pantser versus planner? It basically, a pantser is just sort of sits down and starts writing, and then it just goes. What happens, happens. A planner has a big old outline and writes to that outline and kind of knows it all ahead of time. It seems, it beggars belief, huh?
Yeah, I think your word was you're a liar.
Yeah, I think I did say that. Because there's elements like Agatha comes to mind.
Right.
And I'm not going to, Agatha is a clearly developing plot line. She shows up early. She's in book 1, right? She has to be.
Yeah, she is.
So she's in book 1, and her story is just peppered through in bits and bits, but then it's starting to lock in a little bit. I'm not going to say any more, but by book 7, you know much more about her deal, kinda. Than you did in the beginning. But it all seems to lock together so well that it seems, again, it beggars belief to think that you didn't already know what she was going to do. So you really didn't?
I do. I make it all up. I had no idea. I see what happens is I'll write Agatha, and then I had no intentions on making her anything more special than, a homeless lady who happened to have set a fire. And then I wrote the scene where Carl picks up her shopping cart, and then later on I thought, it'd be kind of cool if there was something weird in her shopping cart. And that kind of, and then I'm like, now there's something weird about her, but I don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. And it makes it look like I planned this thing the whole time, and I just kind of, and there's so many different things like that. Samantha is a very similar style character where clearly there's more to her than what's going on, and we don't really know, and we kind of get hints, and by the time I have the 3rd or 4th hint, I kind of have an idea of maybe where I'm going to do it, but I keep it open where I can change it on the fly, and oftentimes I do change things on the fly. Book 7, I know we're technically talking about The Butcher's Masquerade.
We're just talking about
but
this.
Book 7, the climax of Book 7, going into it, I had no idea what was going to happen. I had no idea how I was going to get out of this. There's so many plates spinning. I wanted so many different places going on at once, and I thought to myself, I need to get all the characters together somehow. And because I don't want to describe, and Patreon people actually saw an earlier version of the chapter where I was describing this war, this was happening, and I threw all that out the window. There's 50,000 words in the Patreon versions that didn't make it into the final book. My editors are sitting over here thank God, because but So I came up with the craziest possible way to bring them all together, which was via a spell, and then they all get like, read it and you'll find out. But that sort of thing doesn't happen naturally. I always felt people who outline, you're outlining a book right now in this moment, and it doesn't leave room for those thoughts that happen, a month later, 2 months later, without too much, changing it around and stuff like that. And I'm already tinkering so much. I don't want to have to like rewrite from the beginning. And I always think, if I was sitting in a different coffee shop when I wrote this scene, if they had picked, a different animal other than Mongo, stuff like that, things I pick at the spur of the moment, how would the story be? If we hadn't, decided to put the Dungeon Anarchist cookbook in and what it is in, the story would be a completely different story. Yeah, so I do make it up as I go along.
Well, good for you.
I am not a liar.
Okay, all right. One of my big like writing maxims that I do when I'm writing my stuff is you can't have all your good ideas at once. Right. And you need to build on existing ideas. You need to toss out bad ideas. You need to really churn through it. And there's different ways that I do that. Like I do a lot of early work in longhand, and then I type it into a program called Scrivener, and then I'll kind of be working it over and over and over. And it sounds like very similar to kind of what you're doing with the Patreon systems. Like we both have all different kinds of systems. Yours just involves a lot of people who pay you for the privilege. Whereas I pay Moleskine a lot of money for their fancy notebooks, which is great. So, but speaking of Patreon and all your legions of fans and all that stuff, was there one moment when you were like, holy shit, this is big. I've really done something big.
Yeah. So it's so weird because, writing's a lonely profession. You don't really know. You see a lot of people buy your book and like, wow, I sold 1,000 copies of this book. And you try to picture what 1,000 people looks like. And it's a lot of people, but they're spread out. And then I remember this was Dragon Con 3 years ago. It was my first Dragon Con, and I had a reading. And the reading was, I don't read Jeff Hayes. I just drag him and make him read. And so we announced, like, Jeff Hayes is going to read from the next Dungeon Crawler Carl book. And, it's never before heard stuff. And I went down the hallway, and there was this long line going around the edge. And I'm like, well, I don't know what this line is that's going to block people trying to get to my reading.
God, will somebody get these idiots out of here?
And, I mean, it was like they gave me this tiny little room, and there was no way we could fit all these people in this room. And we, shoved as many as we can, and then they shut the door, and they blocked a bunch of people from entering. And the next year they did the same thing, even though we told them. And then the year after that, they were like, this is most recent year, they said, well, we can't have a reading because we don't have a room big enough. And then we talked them into having a party instead. So, but anyway, that's Dragon Con 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the first time I had a sense that people were actually real life people. It's the first time I'd ever gone anywhere and met someone I didn't know who had read my book. And it was wild. It was just the most craziest experience. And the same time I saw someone in cosplay for the first time was then too, and that was wild as well.
Yeah, those moments are, and it's just nothing like it, because it is such a you're putting so much of yourself into the stories, and you're like brute forcing them into the world and just hoping someone cares.
Right.
And then when it's reflected back at you with that magnitude, it's really, it can be pretty unforgettable for sure.
Yeah.
Which is great. So that's awesome. I'm glad it's going so well. How long is it going to go? How many books do you think you're going to do?
So we're probably going to do about 10 books is my guess. Give or take, depending on how long these next few books are. I suspect I know book 8 is going to be definitely shorter than book 7. Book 7 is probably going to be the longest book in the series. But if perchance, like book 9, which I suspect is going to be basically the 12th floor, goes on a little longer, it's possible we might split it into 2 books, but probably not. I don't want to split a floor between books, if that makes sense. I don't want like the 12th floor to be 2 books. That doesn't really make sense to me. So we'll make something work on it. But it's going to be 10 books.
10 books. So you're almost done. You're almost through it.
We'll see. I was almost done with the third book by the time the first book came out. I was writing them really fast. It was the pandemic. I was in my underwear all day long. And
Sure.
it was a lot fast. There's a lot less to look up.
Well, there's you guys know George R.R. Martin, familiar with that writer? He one of the, I don't know if he wrote it or somebody else writing about, I think I know who wrote the essay about him taking a long time, and it's not a name that we really say very much anymore. But anyway, the point of the essay was like, it's really difficult. Like, the larger the universe gets, the more you have to track, the more you have to follow, the more you have to think about, and it becomes, I don't know that this happened to George R.R. Martin, but it becomes like almost crippling in a way. Like you start to be consumed by all the things you might be forgetting, or like, whatever. Do you have a research assistant or anything like that to help you with those things?
Well, my Patreon is the...
There we are again.
I have someone that made a database for me, and it's fantastic, but I also have my Excel sheet that I'm used to. My Excel sheet, last I checked, was 203 pages long, and it makes no sense whatsoever except to me. And it would crash my old computer if I opened it. And I know the database is much better, but I'm still crutch myself by using the Excel sheet just because I'm so used to it. I can.
Well, like what's not like one thing that when I was reading the last book, I was like, how does he remember like all the stuff Carl has in his inventory, or like what his spells are, or whatever?
I am a pantser. I make it all up as I go along, but I keep very, very careful track of everything behind me.
Okay, sure.
So I keep very careful track. Every time something gets added, I'll add it to it. And sometimes I won't know. This is true on the Patreon. I was writing book 8, and at the beginning of book 8, you say what the bounty is on him, and I couldn't remember what the bounty was. I couldn't remember what the calculation was, so I just kind of like made up a number and threw it in there. And within like 5 minutes of me posting that, I had like 20 messages from people telling me, no, this is the right number. And that's why I love the Patreon, because they will correct me if I'm wrong about stuff, and I do get stuff wrong every once in a while. So it's really, really, really helpful to have such a dedicated fan base.
That's awesome. I don't know if I could do it, but I'm very glad that it works for you, because we all need something, and I think that's fantastic. That's really good. Yeah, we're maybe a couple more, and then we'll shift over to audience questions.
Yeah,
do you think?
Absolutely.
Okay. So when you asked your first set of questions to everybody about how they're experiencing the story, not everybody had listened to the audio versions. There were a lot of people who hadn't and were reading them. I really want to recommend, even if you just listen to a book you've already read, because the Sound Booth Theater, Jeff Hayes' narration of these books is extraordinary. Jeff actually did a book for me before I had read before I met you, before I knew anything about the Carl series, and we had a lot of conversations about it, lots of accents. I'm like, who's this guy trying to do all these accents and all that stuff? I had no idea what he was capable of. Now I do, now that I've read these books. So I just want to recommend them. They're a really special, unique way of experiencing the story. It's very cinematic, very, very well done, and the characterizations are beautiful. How did you connect with him? And does he ever do something where you're like, that's kind of not how I saw that character? What kind of relationship do you have in terms of the way it's portrayed?
So first off, don't say stuff like that around him. His head's already big enough as it is.
Okay.
No, we were friends before Dungeon Crawler Carl came out. I met him a couple years previous at an audiobook event, and we had talked a few times about him doing a book I had done previously called Kaiju Battlefield Surgeon, and that ended up getting picked up by Tantor, and so there's a regular audiobook version of that out in the wild. You can get on Audible, but now there's a Sound Booth Theater version as well, which is pretty cool. But they have a podcast that they do every week or every 2 weeks called Sound Booth Theater Live, and I went on there, and they had, before the first book came out, they did the juicer scene from the first book, just live. They hadn't read it yet, and it was several of them, including Jeff. And immediately afterwards, he messaged me and was like, I'm doing this book. And I was like, yes, you are. And speaking of Jeff, I was just with Jeff last weekend in L.A. I got a tattoo on my arm. He got a tattoo. He got a tattoo somewhere else. So we got Audible to pay for this. So they brought a whole camera crew, and they're cutting a video right now. Should be available soon to see what happened.
Great, fantastic.
I have a bunch of pictures on my phone that are not safe for work.
I could ask you questions for hours, but I feel like with a room like this, we should definitely get some questions from the audience.
Definitely. And while we're getting that set up, I just wanted to mention something really fast, since I'm here in front of a crowd. As you know, if you don't know, if you take the cover off of these books, it says something like the new one. It says "All Eyes on Me," and this was Jess, my editor's idea to put these on there, and they're fantastic. But every time I suggested something, it kind of got shot down. Or because I'm going to kill your mother for book 4, and they're like, no. But so who here has read book 6? So I have a copy of book 6, and we slipped one past the goalie. So I'm going to show you guys what it says real fast. Actually, why don't you open it for me?
All right. Let's see here. Oh.
It says, "I need a baby seal." So if you haven't read the book, you're not going to know why that's so funny. If Travis Baldry was here, I would have him sign it.
Fantastic.
Okay.
All right, so questions. Who's got questions?
What is the AI's favorite Earth movie?
AI. So what is the AI's favorite Earth movie? I haven't really talked about that so much, but it's probably Footloose.
Is there any news about the TV show?
News about the TV show. Okay, so if you're not familiar, Dungeon Crawler Carl was optioned by NBC Universal to be turned into a television series. That since got Fuzzy Door was assigned as production company. Fuzzy Door is Seth MacFarlane's company. He's the guy that does the Orville and Family Guy. And that was the last press release we had. That was back in, I believe, August that came out. There is news in the right direction that's happened since then. But I can't tell you what that news is specifically. Hypothetically, if there was a specific network that had picked it up, that would be the next news that would come out. And after that, hypothetically, if they've ordered a pilot to be written, that would be the news. But we don't have that news yet, so I can't. Yeah.
You know, Fuzzy Door has a couple of mine too. They are amazing.
Yes.
And they are making things happen, which is not what you can say for a lot of those companies these days. So I'm glad you're with Fuzzy Door. They're great.
Yeah.
One thing I love about your books, especially, is the gods and how they interact and just come down. Do you have a favorite one of yours to write that you love every time they show up on screen? And conversely, do you have one that you hate writing?
Well, there's none I hate writing so much. Not yet. We'll see with the next book. And incidentally, if Jeff Hayes does a voice, he had asked this question, I didn't answer it. But if Jeff Hayes does a voice I don't like, I just kill that character. That's true. That's not a joke. Surrendogore? But so there's a new god we meet in book 7. I really like a god named Eris. There's a god named Metis I really liked. There's a god named Ysalti I really liked, but she unfortunately dies in book 6. So, but maybe something will happen. The Vinegar Bitch, isn't that a cool name? I called her the Vinegar. Yes, I want to bring her back somehow. We'll see. I'm really excited to get to the gods because if you're familiar at all with any sort of, it doesn't matter which pantheon you use, the gods are all crazy. They do crazy things. There's people being born out of kneecaps and sentient menstrual blood and all this stuff that's throughout all of history. And I like to read about that sort of stuff, and I want to put some of that stuff in the series. And we've seen a little tiny hint. I mean, a god stealing another god's penis and it becomes sapient is not that crazy in some religions, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. So we'll see what happens.
You obviously have a lot of hidden jokes, a lot of kind of subtle jokes throughout the entire series. And I know you don't like to go and necessarily explaining them, because if somebody can't figure it out, then what's the use of the joke? But is there a particular one that you're really fond of that you would be willing to share a backstory for?
Oh man, so there are a lot of jokes, and one of my rules of jokes is will it still be funny, or will the story still make sense if someone doesn't get it? And I think I usually succeed, because there's a lot of like really, really, really subtle things in there. There was, jokes about Blue's Clues in book 6. My son was obsessed with Blue's Clues. I watched Blue's Clues and Teletubbies. I'm pretty sure I've watched more of those two shows than any other living human being that wasn't working directly on that television series. And there's, what can I explain? There's a lot of the quest names are named after books or book series. People don't necessarily get those. The rock monsters are named after the members of the band U2. There's Bomo and the Sledge and Very Sullen. And let's see, I don't know what else. There's a lot of stuff that I write that I put into other books that goes across a lot of the series. There's always a Big Shot Chicken. There's always Monobrow Sam. Mm-hmm. There's always a Dr. Metcalf, which I haven't actually put in the Carl series yet. There's lots of things. There's always a weapon named Velma. There's always stuff that there's no reason for it. It's just to entertain myself. So lots of little jokes like that.
How much of you is in Carl?
I get asked this question a lot. How much of me is Carl? I don't think there's very much of me in Carl. Carl, he's far from perfect, but he's a hero archetype almost in some ways. He's like the reluctant hero. I think there's more of me in Donut than there is in Carl, honestly. There's more of me in Louie, I think, than there is in Carl, honestly. It's interesting writing character. Every time I write a character that's named, I always come up with two things. What are they scared of, and what do they want the most in this world? And every named character in the series has this. And Carl is very different than me. He wants quiet peace, but he doesn't want to he doesn't want to hurt anybody in the process, but he has to. And I'm not saying I want to hurt people. But his goals, I think I would die almost immediately. First off, I think most people would, but he's not. I'm not. If I was in the dungeon and I had the powers and I had a talking annoying cat, I don't think I would have gotten nearly as far as he has. But I admire Carl. He's somebody I admire.
Among book, scene, or character, what has been your favorite thing to write in this series?
Oh man, so. My favorite book to write was book 7 because it was the most challenging. Favorite character, that's easy. It's two of my favorite characters. Samantha, by far, is my favorite character. Biggs the Juggalette. That's another sign of pantsing. I could not figure out how to get him out of that scene. So I was like... again, it goes back to keeping careful track of everything behind you. I have a whole toolbox of things he could pull out any minute. He has a condom with B. Arthur's face on it. I'm going to use it one day somehow to get him out of a jam, maybe. But we knew he still had the slug pox, and I was going to make an amazing Sluggalo. And then she just became a character out of nowhere, and then I love her. And I want to use her more in the next series. And favorite scene... every time I write a new book, I have a new favorite scene. But the first time I remember thinking, this is my favorite scene, was in book 2, actually, in the when they were fighting the city elves. And there's that kid that comes up and is upset that Mongo ate his pet because he had tied the lizard to a stick. And then he tries to punch Mongo, and Mongo just bites his arm off. And that was the first time I wrote a scene where there was more than 5 things happening at once, and so it was a real challenge. And I really liked that.
Would you ever consider writing supplementary books, like either some of the other crawlers like Prepotente or Foreign and Fetchy, their stories on the floors that we didn't see, or even the dungeon cookbook itself, like the other authors, their dungeons?
I don't anticipate writing another novel in the Dungeon Crawler Crawl universe once I'm done with the run. Hopefully I can talk these guys into maybe printing. You know, these books have the backstage at the Pineapple Cabaret in it. Hopefully maybe we can do something so we can get, you know, an audio version of it as well. But if we do something like that, I suspect it may be in another medium, like graphic novel. Maybe hopefully we'll get an announcement sometime soon about something like that. But I mean, that's purely hypothetical. Like from another crawler's point of view. But well, if something like that were to happen, it would be written by someone else other than me. But I would have approval over it.
You've written a lot of cool and I guess somewhat scary aliens. What's been your favorite?
Well, my favorite alien, I think my favorite is Architect Houston, who's a Viceroy alien, and these are aliens who are like the doctors of the universe, and their specialty is being able to like cure your disease no matter what species you are, and they have an ulterior motive, and their whole society. A lot of these times I have it mapped out in my head, but I don't put it necessarily all in the story once I think them up, and their whole society is based on, you know, who made the most scientific discoveries is the top of the food chain, and that's kind of but they're also chasing something that's almost like, you know, fantastical, because like outside of it's a fantasy world with lots of gods and stuff like that, but outside of the dungeon it's a very, you know, science-based, sci-fi-based world where a lot of people don't believe in gods. They don't believe in anything like supernatural, but they believe in something that appears supernatural, but it's not. And so the Viceroys, and they're scary, they're terrifying. If you're on my subreddit, on Reddit, there's a subreddit, there's a guy that's been sketching out stories, and he sketched out one of them just the other day, and I saw it, and I was like, wow, that's terrifying.
But it has been amazing hanging out with all of you guys. I hope you enjoy the rest of the night. And how about Matt's stuff? It's incredible, right? Really good.